Good morning, honeys. This is your host, Celia, speaking on Friday, the 24th, even though our business was due the 21st. But like I said, I'm moving this week, so deal with it. We're going to do the quickest recap for you possible here of the most important headlines, as we always do, from the arts world of the week prior, in this case, July 12th through the 18th. And now here we go with your weekly buzz. Our major follow-up for the week, the former High Museum of Art's COO, Brady Loom, who, quote, pilfered more than $600,000 from the Atlanta-based museum by doctoring invoices and approving transactions for personal purchases, unquote, over his approximately 7-year tenure, pled guilty on Monday the 13th, according to an announcement from the Justice Department, to a federal charge of theft, which comes with a maximum prison sentence of 10 years and a fine of $250,000. Quick reminder here, Loom resigned from the museum in December after its parent organization, the Woodruff Arts Center, discovered those so-called financial irregularities. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for November 2nd, and Loom will pay full restitution to the museum as part of his guilty plea, but the Woodruff itself has declined to comment on the case or the effects of the theft on it. The High Museum is the largest museum for visual art in the Southeast, so it's very sad this happened to them, but we're also glad that justice is being served. Meanwhile, the Art newspaper informed us that two Democratic lawmakers, Dina Titus of Nevada and Lloyd Doggett of Texas, have introduced a bill aimed at protecting public artworks in federal buildings commissioned by the U.S. government and whose sites are increasingly being targeted for sale by the Trump administration. Called the Protecting Resources and Ensuring Stewardship of Enduring Records of Visual Expression, or PRESERVE, Act, the legislation would require the General Services Administration to create an expert committee to safeguard said art, including New Deal-era murals, with the goal of preserving public access to artworks considered important records of American history. The announcement of the bill is especially good news to historic preservationists across the nation who have warned that works in buildings, for example, D.C.'s Wilbur J. Cohen Federal Building, the center of an ongoing 9-month preservation fight, could be lost if properties are sold without protections. As Titus stated, quote, art commissioned by the federal government is a vital part of our national heritage and deserves to be preserved for future generations, end quote. But of course, the future of the proposed act remains at best uncertain in the Republican-controlled House. Across the pond, UK politicians have called for an investigation of the British Museum's removal of the term Palestine from its displays. A background recap from Artforum here. The controversy over the alleged removal erupted after Telegraph reported that, quote, the British Museum had made the decision to remove the term from its displays after receiving a letter of complaint from the organization UK Lawyers for Israel in February, end quote. Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Hussam Zumlat, subsequently sent a formal complaint to the UK Foreign Office about the erasure in May. But early this June, an investigation of internal emails at the British Museum conducted by Middle East Eye revealed that the changes to the terminology, aka removal of the terms Palestine, Palestinian, and Israelite occupation, began after a period between October and December of 2024 wherein the institution logged many complaints from organizations and individuals supportive of Israel. Furthermore, a Freedom of Information request proved that the supposed audience testing that the museum carried out, which they claimed showed that the, quote, historic use of the term Palestine is in some circumstances no longer meaningful, end quote, never happened. Now, a range of politicians, from your party MP Jeremy Corbyn to Green Party MP Sian Berry to Richard Borgen, Labour MP for Leeds East, are demanding more insight into the reasoning behind that removal. Speaking about the July revelations, Berry said, quote, succumbing to pressure in this way, if this is what has happened, hugely discredits the museum's leadership and undermines its work, end quote, and that, quote, an independent investigation should urgently be launched to determine if political interference has occurred, end quote. Art News also noted, rather editorially for them, will tell you, that, quote, Kulanen's tenure since taking over as director in 2024 has also been marked by a series of public controversies and internal tension, end quote, so things are not well at one of the UK's most visited and prestigious cultural institutions. And we've got Louvre news. Per Le Monde, which very recently published a report on their June interview transcripts, two principal suspects in the infamous broad daylight jewel heist in October of 2025, one a taxi driver and former motorcycle stuntman named Abdoulaye N, and the other named Gelamala A, claimed in statements to judiciary authorities that a yet unnamed quote-unquote mysterious mastermind hired them only a few days before the theft and gave them instructions to break into the jewels' glass cases before directly heisting along with them. But Guatemala A was the only participant arrested to claim that the target was represented to him as a, quote, store where they make jewelry in Paris. I never would have set foot there if I had known, end quote. While Abdoulaye N. did admit to being the one to drop Empress Eugenie's 19th century crown, he also claimed that he was offered between 15 and 20,000 euros for the job, which he accepted, he told investigators, because he was in, quote, dire financial straits, end quote. Even more incredibly, Abdoulaye N. said that this alleged leader was not satisfied with the job, that he, quote, thought we could have taken more, we wasted time coming back in through the window, end quote. Both refused to provide further information on that leader for fear of retaliation against them or their families and claimed not to know the fate of the stolen jewels, while Le Monde reports that the investigators looking into the theft remain doubtful that this mastermind described by the suspects actually exists. They haven't entirely ruled out the possibility either. And an update on the other story we can't seem to get away from. The Art Journal reports that the possibility of the European Commission's withdrawal of 2 million euros from the Venice Biennale has arisen after months of tension in the dispute over Russia's participation this year in one of the world's largest and most influential art exhibitions. Though the Biennale has defended its handling of the situation, technically following international rules, ensuring the Russian pavilion was never open to the public, and claiming that excluding certain nations constituted censorship, EU Executive Vice President Henna Virkkunen clarified that the recommendation is based on the argument that publicly funded culture should uphold democratic values. As today's sources remind us, quote, the European Commission was among the most high-profile voices to denounce the Biennale in advance of the opening, end quote, this year. The final decision on the funding will be made by the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. And now our brand new stories for the honeys. At the International Council of Museums' 41st Ordinary General Assembly in Paris on June 25th, the non-governmental body that establishes standards of operation for museums all over the world passed a new code of ethics by 89.5% voting in favor. And this is important, as Artforum explains, because the new code, quote, represents the first revision of ICOM's Code of Ethics since 2004, end quote, so well overdue, and, quote, addresses a changing museum landscape that has to confront issues related to artificial intelligence, the climate crisis, and the legacy of colonialism, end quote. The new code was created through a multi-year process overseen by the ICOM Ethics Committee, and which involved the participation of 114 ICOM national and international committees, regional alliances, and affiliated organizations, so this is also a truly global effort. And the 3 changes you need to know about are as such. ICOM has condensed the 8 principles of the 2004 code into 5. These are guidelines now on museums' relationships with society, professionalism, education, collections, and governance. The code now advocates for quick restitutions in accordance with applicable laws, as well as disclosures of potential conflicts of interest. And the most significant change, according to an ICOM spokesperson, they removed a 2004 principle stating that, quote, museums operate in a legal manner, end quote, because, quote, generous interpretations of legal principles are in effect ethical actions, end quote. Last week also saw a prominent international Cape Town-based SMAC gallery facing broader allegations after a now-deleted Instagram post by South African artist Kate Gotkins claimed that SMAC failed to return her painting Audible Doom from 2021 for 4 years after the work did not sell at a 2022 Milan art fair. Gotkins left SMAC late last year after 13 years of working with the gallery, and comments from other local artists soon appeared on her social media posts stating that they had shared similar experiences in their interactions with the gallery. And to be honest, honeys, it isn't looking too good for them, given that 2 anonymous former employees told Art News that they received emotional calls from artists and exhibition text writers seeking payments they said the gallery owed them while working there. The situation is also notable for drawing attention to the sometimes exploitative or at least muddy practices of the fine art world and the dangers facing artists who engage with it. As several of those artists said that they had heard negative things about SMAC, but for the sake of visibility, decided to show with them anyway. Another somber story here, a well-known member of the artist activist collective San Isidro movement, who had been serving 5 years on charges of showing disrespect to national symbols, Cuban artist Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara, according to the Associated Press, is missing after having been removed from a maximum security prison roughly 35 miles southwest of Havana on July 7th. Now his friends and supporters don't know his whereabouts or his legal status. Amnesty International had previously characterized his status as an enforced disappearance and demanded his immediate and unconditional release, while Art Review reports that the UN Secretariat has requested information about Otero Alcantara's status from the Permanent Mission of Cuba to the UN office at Geneva. As tragic and worrisome as this story is, it does show how powerful the arts and artists are, and the very real threats of critical thinking that we creatives can pose to various regimes. And two major stories regarding developments in various places of the world. The design choice for the new National Museum of Ecuador has led to the resignation of two top officials amid mass outcry. An online petition against the winning design for the forthcoming $100 million Quito institution that has been signed by more than 20,000 people reads in part that, quote, a heritage that tells our Andean, Amazonian, coastal, and insular history cannot be contained within a structure that emulates the homogeneity of high-rise corporate real estate projects, end quote. As our headline hints, the backlash brought about the resignation of Ecuador's Vice Minister of Culture, Romina Muñez, just 3 days after the competition results were made known on July 6th. And what we're finding notable about the situation is the petition does not oppose the idea of a museum, it just takes issues with the so-called SpongeBob or cardboard box proposal. So in essence, our story is one of debate over the chosen design and how it relates to heritage, memory. It's all about architecture and the institutional management of a project that is, quote, key to the country's cultural sector, end quote. Meanwhile, Florence is facing a similar problem with a dark, nearly 100-foot-tall redevelopment behind the facade of Florence's former Teatro Comunale, which has, according to the art newspaper, sparked, quote, fierce backlash over its impact on the city's Renaissance skyline, end quote. And that backlash led to a criminal investigation into 15 people involved in its approval and construction, and now it's even initiated a UNESCO review to assess whether the development is compatible with Florence's World Heritage status. While Art News writes that, quote, losing the designation would be an extreme last resort, end quote, this incident should serve as a warning to other designated cities to be mindful of their new building ideas. Staying in Europe for a moment, German daily Der Spiegel reports that German publisher Stiedel, considered one of the most careful and high-quality publishers in the world, and a go-to for artists and art publishers, filed to start preliminary insolvency proceedings on July 12th after struggling to pay employees regularly for up to 6 months at a time. Der Spiegel writes that several lawsuits, which were filed by the Minjobcentrale, the government agency in charge of registering the country's part-time jobs and collecting Social Security contributions, are, quote, still pending with outstanding net wage claims currently totaling in the mid to high five-figure range, end quote. I've hinted at the why we care here, but we really can't undersell the importance of Stiedel. They've got a catalog full of German literature and translations from French, English, and Icelandic, and they've published a number of notable photography books, including those by Joseph Beuys, Nan Goldin, and Karl Lagerfeld. To lose it would just be huge for our business. The filing also points to the crisis the publishing business at large has been undergoing, having been forced to reckon with a steep drop in younger readers in recent years. And coming back to the U.S., Trump has slashed millions of acres from Utah's national monuments. On July 13th, signing proclamations drastically reducing the size of Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante. The parks will lose, quote, close to 1.5 million acres each, end quote, or about 90% of their current lands, according to a White House fact sheet, which also says that while the, quote, specific landmarks, structures, and objects of historic and scientific interest, end quote, protected by the Antiquities Act will remain shielded from commercial activity, the rest of the reclaimed land will be made available for, quote, multiple use sustained yield management, end quote. And we care because of several reasons. The political motivations at play. Trump claimed during his announcements of these cuts that these lands were, quote, taken from the people quite honestly, end quote, by Clinton in '96 and Obama in 2016, and had ordered reductions of the sizes of each back in 2017. But the Biden administration subsequently restored protections for both Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante. There are also, of course, economic motivations at play. These lands contain valuable coal and uranium deposits, and the Trump administration opened wild habitats to mining and drilling earlier this month already. We also care because of the significance of these places. Both are sites considered sacred by Native Americans as the hosts of cliff dwellings, petroglyphs, burial sites, and ancestral villages. So these pushes to expand quote-unquote energy development on federally protected lands understandably prompted outrage from tribal organizations, environmental activists, and cultural preservation groups who see them as threats to tribal sovereignty, especially because none of the tribal organizations affiliated with these lands were consulted in the decision. As far as what's next here, it's on us and other environmental advocacy organizations to take legal action or even just protest action against the administration and argue that the president has illegally revoked the status of the land. Even with those cuts going on, the Trump administration's not done. The traditional independence of the 17-member board, which oversees the Smithsonian Institution's strategy, finances, and governance, has come into question as of last week, as reports from two people with knowledge of the board member approval process came forward to say that Vice President J.D. Vance's efforts to delay the process to approve new appointees are succeeding. Two new candidates for the Smithsonian's Board of Regents have not yet appeared before Congress because of, the two anonymous sources claim, Trump's aspirations to insert candidates he approves of, despite the fact that those two seats on the board have been empty since March due to the scheduled ending of their incumbents' terms. As we know, the Smithsonian receives significant federal funding and has faced monetary pressure from this administration in the past. Yet the one Artforum article we sourced this story from, ironically, noted something else curious. Very little public or media attention has been paid to these vacancies and delays. That apathy, I fear, is an early warning sign that we are becoming burned out in these fights over history and framing and the representation of all of our national stories. Also in Maryland last week, a mural was damaged and the donation box was taken during a burglary at the Harriet Tubman Museum. The burglars remain at large after breaking into the building only a month after it reopened to the public following an extensive renovation. Local reports indicate the perpetrators caused damage to that mural while forcing their way in, but beeline to the donation box, suggesting they were already familiar with the museum's layout. The Why We Care here, that museum is free to the public and relies on donations to function, so this is a significant and untimely loss. The story, of course, also connects to other instances of damage being done to Black cultural institutions and Black artists' works that we've covered throughout the year. And a big scare from New York last week as Legionella bacteria was found in the cooling towers of New York City's most visited arts institutions. Health officials announced Tuesday that the Metropolitan Museum tested positive for traces of the bacteria linked to a Legionnaire's disease outbreak on Manhattan's Upper East Side after previous detection of the bacteria, which grows in warm water, at the Guggenheim during routine testing of its cooling towers. Authorities continue searching for the source of the outbreak, but Union President Olga Brudistova said she was satisfied with the Guggenheim's response, treating the tower immediately and planning to retest next week to determine whether further remediation is necessary. NBC News reported that the city announced it had concluded its inspection of all 183 cooling towers in the neighborhood on July 15th and is, in a break from its typical approach, calling for remediation following first-round tests as the source of the outbreak has continued to elude them. And now, having gotten through the tough headlines, some good news. Sotheby's set a record for an all-time high of $4.4 billion in sales for the first half of 2026, representing a 58% increase in sales from the first half of 2025. Auction income generally went up 59%, while private sales saw a 52% increase. On top of that, Art News reports that the combined sales total that Sotheby's and Christie's, considered the big two auction houses, reported for the first half of 2026 was $8.9 billion. And that figure indicates that we're seeing some reinvigoration, some traction in the art sales side of things. We're seeing some economic growth there. But also, as Art News' Daniel Cassidy noted, these precise percentages matter because Sotheby's business portfolio now, quote, resembles an investment bank or private wealth advisor as much as it does an auction house, end quote. So we're seeing significant shifts in business strategy from years past by these entities. Speaking of record breaks, Heritage Auctions confirmed late Wednesday afternoon that the lightsaber wielded by Luke Skywalker / Mark Hamill during the dramatic face-off with Darth Vader in Star Wars Episode 5 set a new world auction record for a screen-used Star Wars prop, going for about double what was expected at $3.7 million. Heritage also claimed that makeup artist Stuart Freeborn, who helped create Yoda and many of the franchise's makeup effects, held it in his possession until his death, after which point they got a hold of it. We also heard last week about a Nazi-looted painting saved from an Amsterdam garbage pile, which is now scheduled for return. Amsterdam resident Robert van der Hoek found the work, which once belonged to Jewish-Dutch art dealer Jacques Goodsticker, in a trash pile in the city decades ago, but had no idea of its history until a story appeared in Die Telegraaf earlier this year about the discovery of another Goodsticker-owned piece, which had been hanging in the house of the granddaughter of a leader of the Dutch Waffen-SS. Van der Hoek remembered that the painting he salvaged also had a label on the back that said Collectie Goodsticker and an inventory number. Van der Hoek then sent photos of the painting and the label to the newspaper, who contacted Dutch art detective Arthur Brand to authenticate the work, and he did. The painting depicts the interior of Amsterdam's Nieuwe Kerk, or New Church, and is likely by the Dutch Golden Age painter Hendrik van der Berg. It will soon make its way home to Goodsticker's heirs. And to mark the 270th year since the composer's birth, the Mozartium Foundation unveiled 300 gold-colored statuettes of Mozart, barely 50 centimeters or less than 20 inches tall, on Wednesday in Salzburg. The mini Mozarts were accompanied by statuettes of his dog Pimperl, designed by German concept artist Ottmar Hohl. The statuettes are spread all across his former living quarters and gardens and are scheduled to remain in place until August 30th. They are available for purchase for €100 or about $114. And a particularly exciting partnership for yours truly, LEGO has joined with Vienna's Belvedere Museum on a 4,000-piece set of Klimt's The Kiss. It will be available for purchase beginning August 1st and will feature more depth than the original painting, as builders will stack various sections of it on top of each other to create the final look. Stephanie Auer, the Belvedere's curator of 19th and 20th century art, said, quote, "Working as a curator for the adaptation of Klimt's The Kiss into a LEGO art set was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. We had extensive discussions about Gustav Klimt's symbolism, ornamentation, and artistic techniques, as well as how these could be represented using LEGO bricks," end quote. I am jealous as hell. What a cool job. And the reason we care, this will be the largest painting-inspired set that the LEGO company has ever produced. And last but not least, the complete story behind the iconic FIFA trophy design was told by AP last week, writing that, quote, "The Italian sculptor who designed the World Cup trophy wanted to capture three sporting emotions in a single spiraling form: the athlete's struggle, the fans' jubilation, and the moment of victory," end quote. The Associated Press provided a full breakdown of why the trophy looks like that in advance of the final Spain-Argentina showdown on Sunday, and a couple interesting highlights from that article for you all. The first World Cup trophy, made for the inaugural tourney in 1930, was stolen and never recovered. Also, World Cup winners don't actually get to keep the original trophy, but instead take home a gold-plated replica. For our die-hard soccer fans, you can see that full article via the source document in our episode description. And there's our headlines for the week. Thank you for your ongoing patience and support, honeys. Hydrate or dihydrate, take care of yourselves out there, and we'll talk next week. Today's episode of The Beesness was hosted, recorded, researched, fact-checked, produced, edited, and so on by master's degree holder in art history, Celia Bugno. We thank Chris Meinhold once again for our music.